The Bible study today is on Job chapter 29. Turning your Bibles to the book of Job, chapter 29, and let's begin our study. In verses 1 to 6, Job remembers when God was with him. Verse 1, Job further continued his discourse and said, the passage simply says that Job continued on with his discourse. The chapter is the first of three where Job remembers his former happy state, here in chapter 29, contrast it with his present deplorable condition in Job 30, and finally finishes with a defense of his righteousness in Job 31. Verse 2. Oh, that I were as in months past, as in the days when God watched over me. It appears that Job, by this time, has experienced suffering for months. This has gone on and on. There's no way to tell exactly how long he suffered. However, it's reasonable to conclude that this went on for months. Earlier in the book, he described his months of futility in Job 7 and 3. He now remembers how God had watched over him in the past. The term watched represents God's protection. Earlier, Job described God's providence in his life before his calamity. He said that God's care had watched or had preserved him. Job 10 and verse 12. You have granted me life and favor, and your care has preserved my spirit. And so the same term translated here in chapter 29, verse 2 as watched is rendered as preserved in Job 10:12. Your care has preserved my spirit. Earlier in the book, Satan said how that the Lord protected Job and blessed him. Job 1:10. Have you not made a hedge around him, around his household, and around all that he has on every side? You have blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. Verse 3. When his lamp shone upon my head, and when by his light I walked through darkness. Job says that God's lamp had shone upon his head. The lamp is symbolic of God's guidance through life, through his life. He had walked through darkness by God's light. Verse 4. Just as I was in the days of my prime, when the friendly counsel of God was over my tent. Job describes his past as the days of his prime. In other contexts in the Old Testament, the term for prime is translated winter, like in Genesis 8:22, Psalm 74:17, and so forth. Mounts in his expository dictionary define the term two ways. One, winter, the early time of the harvest season, and two, prime, the early time of one's youth. And so here in this particular passage, it's used in the sense of being his prime or the early time of his youth, just as winter or autumn, the early time of the harvest season. Here is describing his prime of his life, the time of his life when he was most productive. Job says that it was in the period of his prime that the friendly counsel of God was over his tent. God's counsel was over his tent or home. He remembers when God was close to him. Verse 5. When the Almighty was yet with me, when my children were around me. Job remembers a time when the Almighty was yet with him, when his children stood around him. His large family was to him a token of God's approval. Job remembered his children. He had 7 sons and 3 daughters, according to Job 1 and verse 2. However, Job's children were killed when a great wind struck the house where they had assembled. Think of Job saying these words, when the Almighty was yet with me, when my children were around me. He thinks back to the time when his children were still alive. Verse 6. When my steps were bathed with cream, and the rock poured out rivers of oil for me. Job speaks poetically of how he was prospered by the Almighty, how God prospered him. First, his steps were bathed with cream. It was as though he had such abundance of cream that came from his flocks that he could bathe his feet in cream. Second, he says, the rock poured out rivers of oil for me. Olive trees, which were the main source of oil, were able to grow in the rocky soil. Perhaps that's what he is indicating here by this second part of the passage. The rock poured out oil, rivers of oil from me. Again, the meaning is that he had such abundance. God prospered him abundantly. Zophar, one of the friends, used similar language when he said that the wicked will not see the streams or the rivers. That is, they will not see prosperity. Job, of course, pointed out how that they were wrong. In Job 20 and 17, Zophar said, he will not see the streams, the rivers flowing with honey and cream. Of course, they do not literally flow with honey and cream, but this is a figure of prosperity. Zophar believed that the wicked would not prosper. Moses, in Deuteronomy 32:13, spoke to Israel how God blessed Jacob. Spoke to the children of Israel concerning Jacob. He said how God made Jacob draw honey from the rock and the oil from the flinty rock. Deuteronomy 32:13, he made him ride in the heights of the earth, that he might eat the produce of the fields. He made him draw honey from the rock and oil from the flinty rock, curds from the cattle and milk of the flock, with fat of lambs and rams of the breed of Bashan and goats. Again, talking of prosperity. With the choicest wheat, and you drank wine, the blood of grapes. And so here he speaks of being bathed with cream, his steps bathed with cream or butter. Verses 7 to 17, Job remembers the time when he was respected. Job's claim to the past, an honorable past, a past where he was honored, was true. As his position of honor would have been public knowledge, any claim to such an honored position, if untrue, could be immediately contradicted. Yet no contradiction. Verse 7. When I went out to the gate by the city, when I took my seat in the open square. Job describes the open square. This was the open area at the gate of the city where matters of public business and matters of justice were conducted. Job recalled when he took his seat as an honored leader in the open square. His seat may refer to this place of public office. He might even have served as a judge, rendering justice. And so the seat might refer to his judgment seat, place where he rendered justice or judgment. Verse 8. The young men saw me and hid, and the aged arose and stood. Job says how everyone showed him respect, young and old alike. When the young men saw Job, they hid. This does not mean that they hid or concealed themselves because they were afraid, but they hid as they were moved from the forefront to the background out of respect. And so they yielded the place of leadership to Job. One version says that they stepped aside. When the old men saw him, they arose and stood in respect. As a sign of respect, they arose and remained standing until Job took his seat. Under the law of Moses, the young arose and stood in the presence of an old man. According to Leviticus 19:32, you shall rise before the gray-headed and honor the presence of an old man and fear your God. I am the Lord. However, here in the book of Job, there is nothing to indicate that Job was an old man, and yet the aged men arose and stood before Job in respect. Again, if this were not true, his friends could immediately contradict his statements. Verse 9. The princes refrained from talking and put their hand on their mouth. The princes were silent out of respect. These were leaders of men, like in Job 3:15 and Job 34:19. Job could be said to be like a prince of princes. When he spoke, the princes remained silent. This term is translated one time in the book of Job as captains, in Job 39:25. Verse 10. The voice of nobles was hushed, and their tongue stuck to the roof of their mouth. Even the nobles remained silent. They listened attentively to Job to hear him. First, their voice was hushed. Their voice was hid. Second, their tongue stuck to the roof of their mouth, their palate. They were mute or silent. Ezekiel 3:26. The tongue may cling to the roof of the mouth because of thirst, like in Lamentations 4:4, but their tongue did not move because of their respect for Job. Again, look at Psalm 137:6 as an example. Verse 11. When the ear heard, then it blessed me, and when the eye saw, then it approved me. When Job spoke, the ear heard. People heard. The ear heard and it blessed him. Of course, by ear, we're talking about the ear of people. We're talking about people who heard. People listened with respect and they spoke well of Job. Job 29, 8 to 10. The eye saw and approved or commended Job. People witnessed the good things that he did and that he accomplished for good. Job 29, 13 to 17. Verse 12. Because I delivered the poor who cried out, the fatherless and the one who had no helper. Job's actions as a benefactor to the less fortunate were well known. Job says that he delivered the poor who cried out in desperation for help. He delivered the fatherless, the orphans, and he delivered the one who had no one to help. He helped the helpless. Verse 13. The blessing of a perishing man came upon me, and I caused the widow's heart to sing for joy. Job rescued the perishing man, and the man blessed him. He helped the widow, and the widow's heart sang for joy. She was happy. She was thankful for what Job had done for her. Verse 14. I put on righteousness, and it clothed me. My justice was like a robe and a turban. Job describes his righteousness and his justice. First, he was clothed in righteousness. That means he was righteous. If he served as a judge, for example, he was fair in his judgments. He was a fair man. Second, he was clothed in justice. In matters of business, in matters of judgment, in settling issues between people, he dealt justly with them. He wore justice like a robe and a turban. These articles might be the attire of a judge. Perhaps if he was a judge sitting on the seat, perhaps he did wear a robe and a turban. But here he speaks figuratively of how he wore righteousness and justice like they were clothing. He was righteous. He was just. Verse 15. I was eyes to the blind, and I was feet to the lame. In his attire of righteousness and justice, Job helped the disabled. First, Job served as the eyes to the blind. He helped those who could not see. Second, he served as feet to the lame. He helped those who could not walk. Verse 16. I was a father to the poor, and I searched out the case that I did not know. Third, Job says how that he served as a father to the poor. He helped the fatherless, the orphans, and he helped the poor. Furthermore, Job says, and I searched out the case that I did not know. He even went to the lengths of searching out people to help. He also helped strangers. He helped those he knew. He helped those he did not know. He helped those who brought cases to him. He even went and searched out the case that he did not know. He went above and beyond. Verse 17. I broke the fangs of the wicked and plucked the victim from his teeth. Job uses the picture of a predator and prey. He speaks poetically of how the predator catches its prey in its teeth. Job says that he broke the fangs of the wicked. By his judgment, he took away the power of the wicked over the innocent. He plucked the victim from his teeth, the teeth of the wicked. He delivered the innocent from the wicked, making the wicked release or drop the innocent. Picture a predator with the prey in its teeth. ready to kill the prey. Here you have the picture of the wicked with the throat of the innocent in his teeth. And Job paints the picture of breaking the fangs, the teeth of the wicked, and forcing the wicked to let the victim drop, let him go. David, the psalmist, in Psalm 58:6, speaks to the Lord. He says, break their teeth in their mouth, O God. Break out the fangs of the young lions, O Lord. As Job defended the innocent from the wicked, such as in matters of crimes and preventing these crimes done against the innocent, did he risk his own safety in delivering the poor? Job answered and refuted the earlier charges made against him. You might remember from Job earlier how that in Job 22:6-9, how that Eliphaz charged Job, he accused him of wickedness, wicked deeds. Job 22:6-9, for you have taken pledges from your brother for no reason, and stripped the naked of their clothing. You have not given the weary water to drink, and you have withheld bread from the hungry. But the mighty man possessed the land, and the honorable man dwelt in it. And you have sent the widows away empty, and the strength of the fatherless was crushed. Job refutes what was said by Eliphaz in Job 22:6-9. Here in Job 29, verses 12-17. Take note that the friends remained silent. There was nothing that they could say in contradiction. That would be the truth. In verses 18-20, we see how Job had expected to continue with honor. Verse 18, then I said, I shall die in my nest and multiply my days as the sand. Job thought that he would die after a long life, a happy life, surrounded by his family, particularly his children. He used the figures of the nest and the sand. He based his expectation for a life of honor on the belief that God would honor him as he had honored God. Consider the following words. First, the word nest is often used literally in such contexts as a bird's nest, like in Deuteronomy 22:6. However, in this passage, in this context, nest refers metaphorically to Job's refuge, perhaps his place of home, his place or home, or maybe his children, those children of his nest, the children of his home. We see a similar usage in Proverbs 27:8 and Psalm 84:3. Second, the word sand is used here figuratively to express a great number of days. Multiply my days as the sand. For example, to have descendants or offspring like the grains of sand, Isaiah 48:19, was to say that they had many descendants or offspring. Earlier, Job used the sand of the sea as a figure of speech to express the greatness of the weight of his grief. Job 6 and verse 3. But here in verse 18, Job thought that he would die, but only after living a long, happy life surrounded by his family, his children. However, things did not end the way that he thought. Verse 19, my root is spread out to the waters, and the dew lies all night on my branch. Job gives a picture of a lush, luxuriant tree with its roots and branches. The tree obtains the moisture that it needs to flourish, to grow. Job had expected to continue to prosper, to be prospered by God as he lived for him. The psalmist described the godly as being like a tree in Psalm 1 and verse 3. He shall be like a tree planted by the rivers of water that brings forth its fruit in its season, whose leaf also shall not wither, and whatever he does shall prosper. Job expected to continue to prosper. Verse 20. My glory is fresh within me, and my bow is renewed in my hand. At the time that he said these words, at the time in the past, we see that Job's glory was fresh within him. I think of the dew, I think of the water of the previous passage, verse 19. Job's glory was fresh within him. What does he mean by glory? He had his honor, and he expected to continue in honor. His bow was renewed in his hand. He was strong and vigorous, as symbolized by the bow. He was a man of vitality. Remember how Job, in his suffering, said that God stripped him of his glory? Job 19 and 9, he has stripped me of my glory and taken the crown from my head. This included his wealth and his honor. God had taken, according to Job, his crown of glory, his honor, his wealth, his possessions, his health. In verses 21 to 25, we see Job's place of honor in society. Verse 21, men listened to me and waited and kept silence for my counsel. Job says how men listened to him and waited. They kept silent as they listened and waited to hear his counsel. It was important to them. After my words, they did not speak again, and my speech settled on them as dew. After Job spoke, men had nothing more to add to his words. They did not speak again. Listeners were satisfied and refreshed by the words of his speech. It was like his words dropped or fell gently upon them. The picture of waters and dew, a picture of vitality, of something that is refreshing, is the morning dew. Similar language is used by Moses in addressing the children of Israel in Deuteronomy 32, 1 to 4, particularly the first couple verses. Deuteronomy 32, 1, he said, give ear, O heavens, and I will speak. And hear, O earth, the words of my mouth. Let my teaching drop as the rain, my speech distill as the dew, as raindrops on the tender herb, and as showers on the grass. Verse 3, for I proclaim the name of the Lord, ascribe greatness to our God. He is the rock, his work is perfect, for all his ways are justice, a God of truth, and without injustice, righteous and upright is he, Moses said. And so he used similar language, drop as the rain, distill as the dew, as raindrops on the tender herb, as showers on the grass. They waited to hear Moses. And Job said that in his prime, before the calamity that came upon him. They listened to him. They waited to hear his words. And when they heard his words, they were refreshed. Verse 23. They waited for me as for the rain, and they opened their mouth wide as for the spring rain. Men waited for Job to speak as people wait for the rain. They opened their mouth wide, eagerly receiving his words, as the dry ground opens up to receive the rain. They soaked up his words like the dry earth, the rain. What about this rain that he describes here as the spring rain? The people of the land of Canaan depended upon the blessings of the Lord. The early rain was the rain that came in the autumn, October, November, while the later rain was the rain that came in the spring, March, April. The latter rain, or the spring rain, was necessary for the crops, given that the dry summer season followed. If the crops were to survive, they needed the latter rain. Deuteronomy 11:13-15, he uses this language. And it shall be that if you earnestly obey my commandments, which I command you today, to love the Lord your God and serve him with all your heart and with all your soul, then I will give you the rain for your land and its season, the early rain and the latter rain, that you may gather in your grain, your new wine, and your oil. And I will send grass in your fields for your livestock, that you may eat and be filled. So he uses those words, the latter rain, the early rain, the latter rain. His blessings came from the Lord for the people. Verse 24, Job says, if I mocked at them, they did not believe it. And the light of my countenance, they did not cast down. Men had such great respect for Job that they were moved by even his laugh or his smile, the expressions of his face. First, Job says, if I mocked at them, they did not believe it. Looking at the text as it stands, they had such reverence for Job that even if he mocked at men, they would not believe that he mocked at them. That is, they would not be offended by what he had to say. They had such great respect for Job. In his present deplorable condition, we note that in the next chapter, chapter 30, verse 1, Job uses the same term for mocked or laughed to describe how they mock at him. He goes from looking at the great respect that people gave him in the past, that perhaps if he even mocked at them, they would not take offense. And now what are they doing? Job 30 and verse 1, they mock or laugh at him. Second, Job says, and the light of my countenance, they did not cast down. The expressions of his face were precious to them. However, now we note, sadly, how that men could not bear even to look at Job. They cast him down. They rejected him. They showed contempt. There are some other ideas about this passage. People have different ideas about what Job may have meant, and they may render this differently in different translations. Let's briefly note a couple. Some say that Job would smile on men at a time when they had no confidence, and that his smile gave them confidence. Perhaps that's true. Others suggest that when Job would smile at them, that they could hardly believe that he was smiling at them. To smile at someone, in this case, indicates good fortune, for him to smile upon them. So they could hardly believe that he would smile at them. We see at the end of the passage, the light of my countenance they did not cast down. The light of his face was so precious to them. Either way we look at the passage, men at that time had great respect for Job. Verse 25, the last verse of the chapter. I chose the way for them and sat as chief. So I dwelt as a king in the army, as one who comforts mourners. Job was a leader of men. First, he sat among men as chief, the head or leader of men who trusted in him, that he could direct their paths. The term translated here as chief, also in Job 12:24, is frequently rendered in the Old Testament as head. It may literally refer to someone's head, or it may refer metaphorically to the head, someone who is a leader. And so Job was metaphorically head or leader. He was chief of men. Job also says how he dwelt among men as a king in the army. This does not literally mean that he was a king, but that he was as a king in the army, someone who could lead. He dwelt among men as a comforter, someone who comforts. Job was someone who comforts the mourners. We see his compassion, his empathy for others. Of course, this is contrary to what was said earlier, and so Job refutes that in this chapter. Job was a good man, a man of righteousness. This chapter describes the former greatness of Job. The author of the book of Job described his greatness. Remember back, Job 1:1-3? There was a man in the land of Uz, whose name was Job. And that man was blameless and upright, and one who feared God and shunned evil. And 7 sons and 3 daughters were born to him. Also, his possessions were 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, 500 female donkeys, and a very large household. So that this man was the greatest of all the people of the East. That brings us to the end of the chapter. Lord willing, we'll continue with this study, and we invite you to come back. Join us again. We encourage you to continue to study the Word of God.